Hi, how are you? Hope all is well. It's topic 13, talking about filing systems. And so in our last topic, we talked about records management systems. And this topic just kind of piggybacks off of the previous topic because now we go into a little bit more detail into the way that a company can decide to file based on the 5 systems that we did. And so the acronym I like to use is the AC is not good in the filing room. So A being alphabetical, C being chronological, N being numerical, G being geographical, and the last one is AC not so good, sorry. AC not so good. So the S being subjective. So A, C, N, S, G, AC not so good. And that's the acronym that I use to help us to remember the different filing systems. And so we talked about what they were, but in this particular topic, we're going to go through active examples or just talk a little bit more about how it's actually done. Of course, we're into the virtual space. So welcome to the virtual space. Let's work together to learn, share ideas, participate, and learn something new. The wise always seek knowledge. And so we're going to get started with talking about filing systems by just giving, before we get into the examples of how to do it, what we're going to do is talk about a few basic things that you need to know when it comes to filing. And so one of these things, no matter which filing system you use, once you decide on an actual filing system, you're going to have to prepare your documents to be filed. And so that means looking at documents and identifying, based on the filing system that you choose, of course, which file should this go in? What is the name of the file that should be given? And so when we're doing all of these things, there's a process involved. And so normally we collect the records. So we collect the different papers and the documents that need to be filed. We inspect them or look at them and make sure that they are complete and ready to be filed. Then what we do is we index and we code those records. After that, if we have to do some cross-referencing, we would make up any cross-reference sheets that lets us know, okay, hey, more information on this topic is going to be in this file, because maybe we have to separate a subject or separate a vendor or something that's common into 2 different files based on the way that we decide to file. And so if need be, we'd have to do a cross-reference sheet to go along with both files to let somebody know, hey, there's additional information over in this file. So we do all of this before we actually file everything. And then once we do any cross-reference sheets if needed, then we sort the records based on how they're going to be filed. And we normally file them away so they can go into their respective folders. And so that tends to be the process of preparing documents for filing. We use 2 particular words, and I wanted to point this out: indexing and coding. Indexing is when we decide how to identify each record to be filed. So if I'm going to index a file, what I'm going to do is identify, okay, am I going to use numerical filing? Am I going to use alphabetical filing? What type of filing system am I actually going to use? And that's a part of the indexing process. Once it's decided, then you can begin to code the actual document. And so coding just gives it, you're going to give it some information based on the filing system that you've selected. And so oftentimes that involves marking or writing on the record, maybe at the bottom stating, okay, this is going to go in this particular file, to indicate how it has been indexed. And so that helps with the sorting process and putting everything together once you're able to mark on the document and identify where it should go. Okay, and that's pretty important because let's say the information mistakenly gets mixed up. If you mark on it and indicate where it's supposed to go, then it's easier to put it back and know exactly where it should be. When we talk about records as well, after we have put everything together, put all of our records together, now we have to go through the process of making sure that we store our records properly. And so when it comes to storing, what tends to happen is you need to locate somewhere to store the actual records and the documents. That may be a file drawer, a lateral file drawer, a vertical file drawer, a desk organizer, your desk itself. You're going to locate somewhere to store those files. And so what happens next is you would actually go through and put the different guides within the storage area, of course, that helps you to know where certain things are. So maybe there's a guide, if it's alphabetical filing, there's a guide that says A, there's a guide that says B, there's a guide that says C. So it's easy for you to identify where A starts and where A and B starts. And so if you're looking for something or you're trying to put something in the section of A, it's easier to find when you have those guides in there. And so you can search for the guides to help you locate any files. So that's why guides are pretty important. If the file has been prepared, then what you're going to do is you're just going to put that information in there. So let's say I got a new piece of paperwork for insurance on a vehicle, and I have an insurance file. It's already been created. It's just a new piece of data that I'm now going to add to that file. And so you would do something like that. If the file is not prepared already, then what you have to do is you have to create it and label it. And of course, after you create it and label it, you put the information in the folder based on the date. Normally we go from date order. The oldest document is at the back, and the more recent document is to the front. But you create it and you label it and you place the information in the folder. And once you're done, you would place it in a particular slot within the filing drawer or whatever filing system that you're using. And so that tends to be the process from creating the file to, or looking at the records, to now putting them in the file. Some things you want to know, sometimes you can use special folders. You can pay attention to special tabs, use color coding to help you identify certain things, color coding labels. All of these different things help with making sure that when you store records, you're able to easily find them. You want to make sure that none of your files are actually overcrowded. If a file is too big and it can't close and it's harder to take out, then maybe you want to close that file and create a more current file with some documents in it. That makes life easier, because having overcrowded files only means it's harder to pull documents out and harder to find the information that you're looking for. And of course, whatever equipment you decide to use, make sure it's appropriate for what you're trying to do. Make sure if you have a large amount of files, that you have sufficient space so that these files aren't all over the place, but in one central location. Retrieving file. When we talk about retrieving records, common procedures for retrieving records, these are going to be after they have been filed away and maybe somebody needs that information. Now it's time to retrieve it on their behalf. And so normally what we use in business is we use requisition forms that help you to help or easily identify which file you want. And so if there's a department that wants a particular file, let's say they want that insurance file, what happens is they would go through the process of preparing a requisition form, letting the records department know what files they actually want. Maybe they want one file or multiple files. Well, on this requisition form, we're going to request, whenever you see requisition, think request, we're going to request that particular files are pulled and given to me. And so as long as the company uses them, those are going to be crucial in the records department. And they're important because they keep a record of the description or the file number that's been requested. They keep a description of the name and contact of the person requesting the file, the person that we would have given the file to. So if I sent it out to the accounts department, I would have a record of the name of the person and which department they're in to know where that file is at all times. The date that they actually got the file is recorded, and then usually the date that it's returned is also recorded. Just because you want to have accountability, you don't want persons taking files for too long, and you always want to be able to find a file in the event that the accounts department is holding onto a file and somebody else comes and looks for it. you can either direct them to where it is or have the accounts department bring it back so you can sign it out to the other party. That's a part of the records management system, making sure that we're tracking and keeping our files in order. Of course, we talked about in the previous video, we talked about an out guide, and what an out guide is just going to be a thick piece of paper or a piece of cardboard that we normally put in its place. Like I said, think about a library card. Library cards are these thick cards that are usually slotted into the book. When the book is borrowed, the librarian takes the library card out and puts it in her records or in the area where she stores the cards for books that are out of the library. And so it's a guide to the librarian to know that this particular book is out and this particular book has been out since this day and this particular person borrowed that book. The same thing happens with the out guides. It helps you to keep track of who borrowed a particular file. And so you can always go back and see if there's something missing from the file or something happened to the file. You can go back and see the trail of who actually borrowed the file so that you can find out anything you need to find out or ask any questions about a particular file. All right. And so what happens is that out guide normally goes right in the same slot as the file itself. So that if somebody's looking for the file, they're going to see an out guide in its place telling them that the file is at this particular department with this particular person. So it's very important to use things like these to assist in managing and making sure that once you've selected a filing system, you can actually properly track your files. Now let's talk again about the 5 filing systems. We have the alphabetical, subject, geographic, numeric, and chronological. Here it is again, AC, not so good. ACNSG, alphabetical, chronological, numerical, subjective, and geographical. So let's go a little bit more into detail on each of them. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is alphabetical filing. And so when we're dealing with alphabetical filing, what we're doing is we are giving each file a name according to, I guess, who it's related to. If it's a customer name, if it's a vendor name, we're giving it a name as the filing unit or the representative of how we're going to label the actual file. And so an alphabetical filing, we organize things in alphabetical order. When we say we're doing alphabetical order in descending order, that means we're starting from Z to A. If we're saying ascending order going up, that means we're going the regular way, A to Z. And so it's important to understand and remember your alphabet when you're dealing with alphabetical filing and taking a look at how things are ordered when you're doing alphabetical order. And so when it comes to alphabetical filing, one of the first things we're going to do is index and arrange. We decide that we're doing alphabetical filing. So in our indexing and coding, what we're going to do is arrange the parts of the names in order first in order to alphabetize them. So we don't just go off of, let's say a person's name is John Stewart. We're not just going to file based on John Stewart. What we actually do is we have to be, there are a number of rules that go along with alphabetical filing that levels the playing field and makes it easy for everybody to understand how things are being filed. And so we'll talk about those rules shortly. But first we have to arrange the names. And then after it's arranged, then we consider each and every word, initial or abbreviation, to be a separate filing unit, and we alphabetize those filing units. And so here's an example before we go into the rules. When indexing, filing would look like this. If this person's name was, he's Mr. John Abraham, we actually going to start our filing. Our first filing unit is going to be each word, of course. Each word is a filing unit. And so Abraham, the last name, is always going to be the first filing unit for any individual. Their last name, then their first name, middle name, and any title that they have. And so in this instance, Mr. John Abraham is going to be filed, or we're going to write on his file, Abraham John, Mr. Campbell's Plumbing is a company, and so company names tend to stay as they are unless they have the word the in front of them. And so when I file Campbell's Plumbing, I'm going to file it as Campbell's Plumbing. John Esquire, John David, what happens? Similar to Mr., that's a fancy name that's given to him. And so I'm going to file that as David, last name, first name, and then his title. And so in alphabetical filing, what I'm going to look at from that point is I'm going to compare the letters in each of the filing units, starting with the first. We have A, C, and D. And so therefore, Abraham is the first filing unit of John Abraham. So therefore, A, there's nothing above A at this point. So A would be the first, then C, then D, then E, then F, then G, etc. going on. Of course, if we had two that began with A, then what that means is we're going to look at the second letter to compare those two that begin with A. That's kind of how it works when you're alphabetically filing. So let's talk about these rules that go along with alphabetical filing. There are a number of rules that help you to understand what should happen. And of course, in our Zoom ins, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail and give more practical examples of the same thing. But these rules, you have to remember them as they relate to just understanding alphabetical filing, because alphabetical filing is the most common. And so therefore you tend to get a lot of questions, or you may see questions in the BGCSE about filing alphabetically. And so rule one is the order of names. When we have the name of an individual, we should know that the last name is always the first unit, followed by the first name, then the initial or middle name initial. That's next. So if my name is Sarah Lee Jones, the first filing unit is Jones. So I'm going to start with J when I'm trying to determine where to file it alphabetically. Then Sarah, because that's my first name. Then Lee, which is my middle name. And that's how it works when we're working with an individual that has just a regular name. When we have rule two, we have minor words and symbols are considered separate units. For example, when we have the and things like that, those are separate from any other units. When we have the word the, whether it be in a company name, most times it's going to be in a company name, the word the is always going to be the last indexing word of the last filing unit. So if the company's name is the Perfume Bar, when we're filing it, is no last name to use. It's a company name. So I'm going to put Perfume Bar, I use the and I put the as the final indexing unit. Because could you imagine, there's so many companies that began with the word the. And so that's important as well. Rule three, when we have punctuation and possessive, so apostrophes in a person's name, we disregard the apostrophe because we can't compare apostrophes with no apostrophes. And so therefore, if you have a person's day saint with a apostrophe, normally you leave out the apostrophe. It's DESAINT when we're comparing and ordering it based on alphabetics. Rule four, single letters and abbreviations. Initials in names are one unit. So if my name is Sarah D. Parker, when I put that in indexing order or filing order, I'm going to put Parker, Sarah, and then D is the last unit. Even though it's only an initial, I consider it to be a single unit by itself. Any abbreviations are normally indexed as written. So if a company name has abbreviations in it, we leave it just as it is. Letters separated by spaces are indexed separately. So if I have T space B space C space A in a company name, those are going to be 4 different units, not one. But if they don't have any space in between, it's going to be 1 unit. All right. The fifth rule, when we have titles and suffixes, so things like Mrs., Doctor, Junior, they aren't considered to be very significant, and so we leave them for last because they're just a title. And so if the person is a doctor or like an esquire, then what happens is that information is going to always be the last filing unit. If it's a religious name like bishop or apostle, or it's a royal title like Queen, Her Majesty, we're going to index that as written. So Her Majesty the Queen is going to stay Her Majesty the Queen because it's a royal title. Bishop Mike Jones is going to stay indexed as Bishop Mike Jones. So we wouldn't do Jones Mike Bishop. No, we would leave it as Bishop Mike Jones because it's a religious title. The other rules, when we have prefixes, such as Saint San or Day or Miss Vaughn or Livon or something like that, we consider that to be one unit. Because it's similar to when we think of when those names come along, it's usually a dash or an apostrophe that goes along with it. And we're just going to take that apostrophe out and attach it to what it was in front of. So there's no real space in between. And so therefore we leave it as such. When we have numbers in business, if it's in written form, of course, we're going to index it regularly alphabetically. So if they spell it O-N-E, one police plaza, then what happens is we index it based on the zero. I mean, the O, sorry, not the zero. Based on the O, we put it in alphabetical order. However, if it was the number one and then police plaza, we would index that based on the number one. And as a rule, when it relates to any alphabetical filing, numbers always go before letters. So if you have the number 12, Police Plaza, that's going to come before Abraham Lincoln. Because that's, or well, no, not Abraham Lincoln. Abraham, so Mr. John Abraham, John, Mr. is going to come after the number 12. Because once you have numbers, which is only going to happen in company names, those numbers go ahead of all alphabetic files. And so you just continue just regular numeric filing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you go in that particular order. If there are Arabic numbers, then they normally come before Roman numerals, but you don't see often they don't give these many complicated things. And so that tends to be what happens. With Rule 8, we have organization and institutions. You use the name that's written on letterheads or business licenses. So Royal Bank of Canada Limited, you would file it as Royal Bank of Canada Limited. You wouldn't put RBC or anything like that. You would put the proper filing so that persons are able to match and identify. When you have identical names, let's say you have 2 identical last names, or 2 identical companies, you're going to file it based on the address at that point. Most of the times it comes with the address. So if you have an address for that person, let's say you have 2 Sarah Joneses, then there's a Sarah Jones that might be in Nassau, there's a Sarah Jones that might be in Freeport, or maybe they're on Carmichael Road versus Sarah Jones in South Beach. Well, what you can do is you can add the address or the city or any information behind it that helps you to separate it from the other Sarah Jones. And so that's how your filing would be for that particular those Sarahs going forward. When we talk about government names, that could be things like, the Ministry of Education. What happens is you go first by the name of the governmental unit, the country, the state, county, then city. Of course, we don't have county, we don't have state and all of that. A good example is we just start with the department name first, and then we move from there. We start with the governmental unit, Ministry of Tourism, or tourism is the actual governmental unit, Ministry of, and then Bahamas. So you separate it a certain way when it comes to those particular governmental units. Geographic filing. When we're doing geographic filing, our records are arranged in alphabetical order based on geographic location. And so you're going to find that unless it's numerical, everything is still has some form of alphabetical filing involved. It's just instead of using names as the basis, name of the person, name of the company as the basis, which happens in alphabetical order, something like geographic uses the place as the first filing unit. And so normally what happens is you take the largest location as the primary guide. And so if you're talking about a company like Freeport Oil is in the Bahamas. So we would start off with Bahamas. We would have a filing section for companies in the Bahamas. Then you would probably have a filing section for companies in Grand Bahama. Then you would have a filing section for companies in Freeport. And then within the companies in Grand Bahama, Freeport, you're going to have Freeport Oil in the F section. And so that tends to be how it works. And so you're still indexing and sorting things based on alphabetical order, but it just starts off with the location of the company or the location of the person whose file you're recording information about. And so here's an example. When indexed, let's say we have 3 files for this company here, Dental Supplies Inc. If we have 3 files for them, one way that we can geographically file them, let's say we have 3 vendors, or we have 1 vendor that's used by 3 of our locations. And so 1 location is in the Bahamas, 1 location is in Miami, and 1 location is in Vermont. Maybe we don't want all of their information to be in 1 file. We want them to be in 3 separate files by location. And so that means this first file we're going to have in the section for the Bahamas, Nassau, and then Dental Supplies Inc. There you're going to find a Dental Supplies Inc. file for our Nassau branch in the Bahamas section. Then you're going to have Miami and Vermont are both in the US. This is the largest unit. So the country is always the largest unit. And so USA is what's going to be our next grouping. And so from there, both of these are the same, of course. So we can't put one over the other as yet. We can put Bahamas first because B comes before U. But what we have to do is look at the city, Miami versus Vermont. Miami would come before Vermont, of course, because M comes before V in the alphabet. And so when I list this, I'm going to put Bahamas, Nassau first, then US Miami, Dental Supplies Inc., US Vermont, Dental Supplies Inc. So if I want to pull up any files related to my Miami office, I should know that I need to look in the USA section, the Miami section, and then I should be able to find those particular files. When we have subject filing, what happens is records are arranged by subject or topic that they actually relate to. And so the contents are going to be sorted based on what's inside more than the name of the individual or the company. And so it can always be broken down in some way or some form. And so that's how it's going to happen. So here's an example of 3 files here. Maybe this is a company and the company has 2 vehicles. And so we have 3 sets of papers that we need to file. And 2 of them are related to one particular vehicle, the Acura that has this license plate number. And so one of the documents is insurance papers. One of them is vehicle registration. And so we could break down our files by saying the subject or the main topic of my vehicle files are going to be based on the type of vehicle it is and the type of document it is. That's the subject. And so what happens is Acura is going to have 2 files that is still in alphabetical order, like I said, but it's just in alphabetical order based on subject. The first subject is the Acura. The second subject is the Mercedes. And so Acura is going to come before Mercedes because A comes before M. We have 2 Acura information. And so what's going to happen is the subject, as we go further into the subject now is going to dictate which of these are going to be first in the filing cabinet. Insurance papers are going to be before vehicle registration forms because I comes before V. And so that tends to be how it works with subject filing. First, you select the subject, the main subject, and then you can break your main subject down even further. So I'm sure there can be a copy of purchase documents in there, loan documents in there, repairs for each of the vehicles in there as well. And so when we are separating it by topics, we are subject filing. And then we have our numeric filing, which of course means that we're going to arrange records by numbers. And so not all files start off in numbers, but what happens is you normally have to give each file a number if you're going to use numeric filing. And so, like I said previously with numerical filing, the beauty of it is that you don't have to worry about ever running out of numbers, because remember, numbers go into infinity. And so this is the only infinite choice, whereas you can be a bit limited with all of the other ways of filing. Numeric, you just make sure you assign each file a number. So I give Jones a number of 3, and I give Bethel a number of 4. Then that means even though it's Bethel and Jones, B versus J, because I'm doing numeric filing, Jones still comes first because Jones's number is before the other person's number. And so that's kind of how it works. You order your filing based on the numbers given. And so there are different options on how they do that. We have terminal digit filing, and then we have middle digit filing. And so an example being with terminal digit filing, we're looking at the last set of numbers to help us determine which goes first. And so that means if we look at this, we have 5 and we have 3. The number 3 is going to go before the number 5 when we're putting it in ascending order. If it's middle digit, well, if it was descending order, then we would put the number 5 before the number 3. If I was to do this for regular numerical filing, I would just start from the beginning. But because this is terminal means the end, I'm going to look at the last numbers to decide how it's filed. Middle digit, we use that when we're trying to place things in order based on the middle digits of the numbers themselves. So we disregard what happens at the end, and we look at the 2 or 3 middle digits in the number. So in this case, the middle digits are 5 and 3, and here it's 5 and 5. So if I'm putting them in ascending order, I'm going, this file is going to go before this particular file, okay? And so some companies find it useful to use these other methods of filing, but when it comes to numeric filing, an easy way to go is just starting with the first number. We can compare 1, 1, 2, 2, 5, and 5, but we can put this file first if we're starting from left to right, because 3 is greater than 5. That's kind of how it works. And so here's another example of a simplified way of numeric filing, just looking at the first digit and going, we're placing it in order. It doesn't matter what the description on the document is. We're more concerned about the numbers that are given and making sure those numbers are in order. So we have 3, 0 for all of them. 4, 5, 6, 4 comes before 5, 5 comes before 6, and so that's how we would place it in that order. Chronological filing is when we arrange files based on the date. And so maybe we want to have filing that's based on months. So, or based on days, bills that I've paid for the month, bills that I've paid, or financial statements for this month or this week, or, you know, we focus on not the names given, but the dates that documents have been prepared, or the dates of receipt or something like that. We order it or file it based on the date. And so oftentimes the most recent documents are kept up front instead of going from the oldest document to the newest. We go from the newest to the oldest. That tends to be the way that we use it. And with chronological filing, of course, we can use a combination of other systems with it, because let's say we have multiple things going on. We're filing by month, and we have multiple things going on for that particular month. Then we still need to know how we're going to place it in order. And so we can still use alphabetical, we can still use numerical, all of that we can still use with chronological filing. And so here's an example. Let's say we have a general meeting minutes, different general meeting minutes folders. We can file it according to date with the oldest item being first. And so when we look at it, when we're looking and comparing numbers, yes, March comes before September, but we start by looking at the date first. The oldest date or the most recent date of all the three documents is 2021. And so that means this is going to be the first file in the drawer, this because it's the most recent. When we compare the other two now, we're left with 2020 and 2020, okay? Then we look at the month. September comes after March, so September is more recent than March 2020. And so that means September is going to be next in the file, followed by March. So it's not as simple as January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. It's more so looking at the date, the year first, then looking at the month, then comparing the days. Because if we had two of these that were September, well, then if I had something that was September 12th and something that was September 11th, then September 12th would go first because that's an earlier date than September 11th. And so when you're chronological filing, just remember these things so you don't mix any of those things up. The year matters most, then the month, then the date to compare from newest to oldest. And so that's just a general idea of our filing systems, how they work, and what happens in the filing process. Once you identify a filing process and the way a company wants to file, then it's up to them to look at the documents that they're looking at and file them, create the files for them, code them, put the information on them to make it easy to slip them into the folders that they're supposed to be in. And then from that point on, the files can be used and retrieved and borrowed and brought back. Remember that you have to keep records of things that leave the office, things that come back for proper management of these files. You can choose between numerical filing, chronological filing, geographical filing, subjective filing. But one of the most common ones is going to be alphabetical filing. And as a reminder, alphabetical filing actually can touch each and every one of them if the need arises. And so you want to be familiar with knowing how to put anything in order, because these are questions that oftentimes come up in your core and your extended papers, filing and filing methods and putting things in order. They love those questions. So you want to be familiar with them. In the zoom in section, we're going to zoom in a whole lot more on how to do these. And so I look forward to you looking at that information and getting in contact with me if you have any questions. Happy studying. Hi, Brenda here. I just want to take the time to say thank you for choosing this course. Thank you for choosing yourself and for preparing as you should for Office Procedures BGCSE. Look forward to more from me and Business Teacher Powell, and I look forward to seeing you in other classes. Bye.